think people just got to. I know there's a bit of pride in not having to wear glasses to drive, but ultimately, I think we need to think about safety first. These are, I think we sort of forget that they are dangerous objects that we're in command of. So, having not only your wits about you, but having your eyesight giving you as much information as possible is a good idea. And just kind of, understanding that some of those little issues you might have around confidence that driving in the wet, driving at night might be down to a small prescription issue. And when we're suggesting that maybe you might benefit from a pair of glasses in that sort of situation, we're not sort of making you a spectacle prisoner for the rest of your life. And it's really just having the tools available to be able to enjoy driving as safely as possible.
If you live on the Gold Coast or anywhere in Australia, really, chances are you spend a lot of time on the road. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, there are around 19.4 million licensed drivers in the country. And on average, we chalk up way more driving hours than people in Europe or East Asia. But here's the thing. While we often think about fuel economy, car safety, or even road rules, most of us don't think much about the role our eyes play in keeping us safe, focused, and confident on the road. Today, I'm joined again by Paul Graham, lead optometrist and owner of Harmony Vision Care in Varsity Lakes, to talk about the link between vision and road safety. We're unpacking why your eyes can get fatigued on long drives, how the right eyewear can improve your comfort and sharpness behind the wheel, and why things like peripheral vision, night glare, and even prescription riding goggles matter more than you might think. Whether you're driving, riding, or cycling, this conversation will help you see the road ahead literally more clearly. But first, who am I? My name's Paul Salloway. I'm the owner of Optics Digital Marketing. We're an agency that helps independent eye care practitioners to grow their clinic. So, hi, Paul. Good to see you again.
Likewise. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Very good. So, Paul, I want to just share with you something. So, I have a number of friends who live in Japan. And one of the things that struck me when getting to know them, I'd ask, like, what do you do in your free time? And a number of them would say to me, "Oh, my hobby is driving." And I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for the punchline because typically, like, if you ask that to somebody in Australia, we wouldn't. I mean, there are exceptions, of course, but most people probably wouldn't regard driving as a hobby. But of course, in a lot of countries, because of the way public transport's set up and lifestyles and whatever, driving literally is, optional. But in this country, driving is just something that we have to do often because we have no choice. So as an optometrist, do you feel that maybe we don't spend enough time talking about the role that vision plays in our whole driving experience?
Yeah, and it's an interesting sort of thing around driving, and this is what we'll sort of get into. There's meeting the minimum standards of being legal to drive, and then there's actually being as safe as you can be and maximizing your vision for a whole bunch of things. And and obviously, like a lot of things in vision, a lot of it gets narrowed down to how clearly you can see on the 20/20 or the 6/6 chart. But there's a lot more going on in vision, and there's a lot more things that kind of impact on your ability to drive confidently, safely, and be able to drive long distance with less fatigue and those sorts of things. So,
yeah,
you reminded me of, yes, that so much driving that we do, that I'm sure as Australians we've all got the stories of speaking with English backpackers who are going to do a day drive somewhere and thinking that some part of outback Queensland's only going to take a short amount of time to drive, and we're kind of going, okay, you've got 3 days up your sleeve. Okay, it's not a day trip.
Yeah, like, I've done a few long drives. I remember driving to Rockhampton in a day once from Brisbane. That's not something I'm in a hurry to repeat again. So what exactly is visual fatigue? And, like, why is it something that often becomes an issue when we're doing long drives?
Yeah, and sort of we tend to talk about these things in little distinct little boxes, but there is a very strong link between your overall concentration levels, mental fatigue, and visual fatigue. The vision is your kind of master, some say dominant sense, and obviously it's a good part of what you use when you're driving. And so if you're getting tired visually, then you're going to be getting tired mentally. Two are hard to sort of separate. And so there's a number of things that can sort of add into that overall fatigue when you're driving from a vision perspective. One of the things that that comes up often in our chats is when we're concentrating, we don't blink as much. And when we don't blink as much, then there's more opportunity for the eye to dry out. So not only can that impact on the quality of how well you're seeing, but that can also start to create symptoms that make your eyes feel tired, dry, gritty, sore, those sorts of things. And anything that sort of eats away and becomes a more conscious symptom is going to be eating away concentration.
Right. And that plays into issues like road safety, doesn't it? If we're feeling tired, fatigued, our reaction times are sort of impacted as well.
Absolutely. And then if you add something into a situation where someone might have a vertigo or a binocular visual dysfunction, that only adds to the level of concentration and mental effort required to kind of be safe drive.
So are there any sort of easy habits that drivers can adopt to keep their eyes fresh on long trips?
Yeah, we often talk about, and look, this might be a bit, the general advice is that you probably shouldn't drive more than an hour and a half or 2 hours without a break. If you have an opportunity to, not take your mind off the act of driving, but if you've got a long straight or you've happened to pull up at a set of lights, then they're the times to think about actually doing some proper blinks. And it doesn't have to be a squeeze. We don't want the eye shut for too long. We want not sort of normal blinks, but the idea is making sure you're conscious that the eyelids actually come together. So, doing the occasional period of, 10 or 12 good blinks, as long as you're not taking your eyes off the road and your concentration away from what you're doing, will help maintain a really good tear film.
Right. I guess also, like, if you've got the car air conditioning cranked up, that might also, be a factor as well.
Absolutely. Try and keep that vent directly blowing on your face, or if you've got the window down, same sort of issue, then that's going to add to the drying effect.
So, I think a lot of us have got like elderly parents, and at some point, you have to have that hard conversation about how much longer they can keep their license going. So why is it that you think a lot of people fail to notice that their vision is slipping until it becomes really an issue?
Yeah, well, this comes into the mental aspects of seeing. So, you might have perfectly sharp vision coming in. You may have had your cataracts done, and so you're well and truly passing the 20/20 chart. So in that sort of situation, this sort of hits close to home because I have a family member who's just had their license removed because of processing speed. And it's the ability to look at something visually and have the brain work out in the right time of how to respond and react. So, how you respond to visual stimuli and the changing visual conditions around you when you're driving are really important. And so processing speed is kind of the background part of the visual process we don't think about. Other things can creep up on you. So, go back to the cataract example, is for a lot of people, cataracts just slowly start to make your vision cloudier and cloudier. And now for most things, you kind of adjust to a certain point. And I think prior to becoming an optometrist, I remember my dad telling a story about my grandfather. My dad was driving, my grandfather was in the passenger seat, and he was complaining about the truck they were following having a really muddy number plate. Look how muddy that number plate is. My dad's like, that's not a muddy number plate. It's absolutely clear as anything, and it was my grandfather's cataracts getting in the way, him seeing clearly. And so, he didn't even realize, because for day-to-day stuff he kind of managed and compensated, but that's where it creep up on you. And things like macular degeneration can be the same thing. So there are conditions as you age that can creep up on you. Glaucoma, that's a sneak thief sight. That doesn't tend to affect clarity. That tends to affect your peripheral vision, where your peripheral vision starts to get impacted. And the challenge with glaucoma is, and this is why it's such a routine part of an optometric exam for adults, is making sure we're looking at making sure we're checking eye pressures, is that if you become conscious of your loss in your peripheral vision, things surprising you when they come from the side, people walking near you in the shopping centres, or that cars come from nowhere, then 80% of the damage is sort of done. So it really bodes well for, getting regular checks when you get into your 40s and 50s and beyond, and especially if you've got a family history.
So if I'm hearing it correctly, I think what you're saying is that, like, even when our eyes are starting to fade, sometimes the brain just kind of fills in the gaps and kind of
absolutely
it tries to bridge the gap between what you are actually seeing and what it thinks that you should be seeing, and that in itself can lead to problems, right?
Yeah, that's right. You just don't know because you just adjust over time.
And I guess the other side of that is, like, we've talked about older people, but also a lot of younger people, maybe they've just got their license, but perhaps they don't realize that they are myopic. I think that was the case with me. I didn't realize that I needed glasses until I started having trouble reading street signs. So that's also something like that. That's also a good reason for a lot of young people to get their eyes properly tested, especially when they're starting driving. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And everyone's got a medico-legal responsibility to make sure that they don't have a health condition of some, or a medical condition that prevents them from being safe for themselves and the people they're carrying and the other road users. And, the Australian roads has a minimum standard for private licenses, a minimum standard for commercial commercial licenses that mostly deal with sight, but also get into things like peripheral vision, whether you're getting diplopia or double vision. And so being well armed, and there's nothing worse than turning up to your local transport department and then all eager to get your license, and then finding out can't actually pass because you can't see down the chart well enough.
And optometrists can do driver's license checks, can't they? Like visual checks before you.
Yeah. So we've got the Australian roads guidelines that we go by for commercial and private licensing, and so there's a checklist that we can go off and make sure people are legal to drive. And that's some of the advice that we might have if I've got someone who was 6'6" and is now starting to get a reduction in their distance sight. I'll often have that conversation around, hey, look, you're still within the legal limits, or hey, look, you're a bit borderline now. I think next visit we might be having a discussion about you legally needing to wear prescription while you're driving, and that opens up the conversation that there's a difference between being legal and feeling safe and confident, and everyone's got their own kind of bar and measurement. It depends the kind of driving that you're doing, the conditions you're in. But just because you might pass the driving standards doesn't mean that you might benefit from seeing even better. Particularly, they talk about driving a car as it's a loaded weapon. Yep. Dangerous things that I think we take for granted.
Yep. Yeah. And so we can talk about driving safely, but we can also talk about driving comfortably, taking some of that strain off the eyes. And I think this is where having the right kind of eyewear can be really important, can't it? So
absolutely.
Can you kind of tell me a little bit about what type of eyewear upgrades would really help people to feel comfortable when they're on the road a lot?
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to mind is, you might have a minor refractive error. So you might have some mild myopia or short sight. You might have some mild astigmatism, or if you're in your sort of 40s and 50s and beyond, you might have some mild long-sightedness that's initially affected your near vision, but starts to affect the distance. And you might be perfectly fine during a bright sunny day. Everything's clear because in bright light, our pupil gets smaller. That gives us a depth of focus. There's plenty of light and contrast around, but you might not realize. You think, oh, look, I'm not so confident at driving at night, or the lights around things look really starry. And sometimes that's when a small correction can be helpful. So it just sort of pulls everything together and makes things a lot sharper. And we often get people go, oh, look, I feel like my vision's great until I wear sunglasses. When I put sunglasses on, I keep finding I want to lift them up and down. And what happens when you put a sunglass on, pupil gets bigger behind it. And so any small errors in your prescription become more noticeable, and become more noticeable when you're doing something that requires a lot of concentration, like driving. So again, we might have patients who happily go without a prescription, but might find that they like having a little bit of prescription in their sunglasses, or a clear pair of glasses for driving at night. So they're probably the first things that we sort of think about are the really basic. Let's just get you, seeing clearly as possible.
And okay, so if we're talking about sunglasses, tell me a little bit about like anti-polarization and anti-glare add-ons to your glasses.
Yeah, look, and there's lots of different sort of terms and language out there. So if we have a look at reflections, okay, so reflections off glass, reflection off the road, reflections off water, sand, those sorts of things. Reflected light becomes polarized. So the nature of that glare source, and glare is kind of almost your reaction to these reflected sources and how uncomfortable they are. And if you wear tint that is not polarized, you simply darken the glare down. So you're just reducing the volume of light. So that is one way of making yourself more comfortable. What a polarized lens does is it actually cancels the polarization that's in the reflection. So you actually cancel out the glare. You're not just making it darker, you're cancelling that reflection. And that's why people who fish and want to be able to see in the water love polarized glasses, because light hitting the water and bouncing is polarized. Sunglasses cancel the polarizing in the opposite direction and effectively cancels it out. And so that can be the most comfortable way. You get a small number of people for some reason can't wear polarized glasses. It's an odd thing that I haven't gone to the trouble of working out just yet. And certainly for some people, the polarized glasses do make windscreens and on other cars look a little funny, and they don't like that. I've never seen it being an issue with the windscreens in the cars. I've actually driven them myself. Most car manufacturers have been careful to make sure that their LCD screens are not polarized in the wrong direction, because computer screens and phones and anything that's an LCD screen is naturally polarized as well. So they need to make sure that they're all sitting in the right direction. I think there is a famous story of a model of Australian-made Ford car, might be a Falcon or a Fairlane. It's the first LCD model, and they weren't careful enough, and so you could not wear polarized glasses and drive
Right.
that car.
That would be a problem.
And then we get into what sort of other, so you've got sunglasses, tints, polarization. You can get tints that change. So people might be aware of, it's a bit like they call the technical name for is photochromatic. So you go out in the sun, the UV light activates a chemical in the lens which makes it go dark. The most popular brand that everyone talks about is Transitions, and it's almost become a bit like how vacuum cleaning was called hoovering. One of the big brands becomes the verb, and it's a bit like Googling. So, and Transitions, because they need light to activate, traditionally don't work so well in the car. So you walk in the sun, they go dark. You walk inside, they go light again. But because of the absence of UV in the car, because it's blocked by your windscreen, even if it's not a tinted windscreen, you're getting some blocking of the UV. They don't activate as much. But they've got around that by creating a different version that you can get called an extra active, which will activate in the car and go a medium tint in the car. You can even get one that's clear, almost clear, and actually polarizes as a dark. So there's lots of choices there. So if you've got a prescription and you're wanting a sort of a pair of glasses to try and be a jack of all trades, then some of these new transition tints and applications to lenses can be something to consider.
Yeah, that is interesting. I didn't know that, because I thought it was a bit of a catch-22, because I was hoping to get some transition glasses, but I thought, well, if I'm driving, it's not really going to help me that much. But listening to what you just said, that maybe solves that problem.
Yeah, and look, I've got a lot of my staff use the extra active transitions and actually have them in the glasses that they wear at work, and I almost forget that they're wearing them, because the old extra active used to be a visible tint when they were deactivated inside. So it wasn't a lot of people who went for that, but the new ones are almost clear. There's the slightest hint of a tint, but not enough to really be conscious of. And so the product's really improved in the last few years.
Just before we move on, so with anti-polarized lenses, is that something that we can get into regular spectacles, not just sunglasses? I mean, is there like a coating that you can put into regular glasses that are also going to cut out that glare?
So if we go coatings first, so you can get an anti-glare coating. It's not polarizing. It just takes the white reflection off your lens. Okay. And so they're great for night driving. Well, look, I think every pair of glasses, unless you've got a very good reason, should really have an anti-reflection coating on it. In places like Germany and Japan that only talk about it, it's just part of the lens. I think in Australia, because our conditions are a lot more harsh, the early versions of anti-reflection coatings were harder to keep clean. They didn't last as well in our heat. But unless you've got a very good reason, an anti-reflection coating takes the white reflection off your lens, so they're clearer to look through, especially if you've got reflections coming from behind, but even just the internal reflection in the lens can be cancelled down. So you've got that kind of coating. You've got the transition tints. So if we are making up a pair of glasses, the lab has to there's a whole process of that transition has to make sure that a lens manufacturer is making the lens with their product in it according to a certain standard. So you have to order the lens right from the beginning as a transition lens before it's made. So that's done at the lab level. And like I said, we've got just a tint. You can get extra active, you can get polarized, and you can get some different colors on the brand. If you want just a tinted pair of prescription glasses, then that's where we take a prescription lens and they dip it in a dye. So they actually treat the lens. That's a surface coloring that's applied to the lens. But if we want polarized, it's a bit like transitions, we have to order it as the lab has to use a blank that already has the polarizing film that's embedded inside the lens. So it's actually a film that's embedded.
And just to finish this off, I guess, is with if you do have any sort of glasses with coatings on them, whether that be anti-glare or whatever, I think you have to be a little bit careful about leaving them in hot cars, don't you? Like if I remember correctly, like leaving your glasses in very hot environments can really sort of damage and degrade that feature.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of, and people don't realize that there are some areas in your car that hit 60, 70 degrees, particularly in Australian summer. So an anti-reflection coating is also called a multi-coating, and these things are microns in thickness. So they're really, really thin layers, but they can be made up of 9, 10, 11 layers. And the tricky part with the technology behind anti-reflection coatings is if you have one type of plastic, you work out a great anti-reflection coating to put on. Now, the lens plastic itself expands and contracts at a different rate to every single layer in that coating. So a coating that works for a 1.5 plastic is different to a coating that works for a 1.6 that's different to a 1.67 that's different. And these are all the different indexes. So there's quite a lot of research process technology that goes into having them all tolerate some expansion and contraction within a certain sort of temperature range. As soon as you exceed that, then that's when it's a bit like you get this crazing. It's the pulling apart, breaking of it. It's a bit like watching your paint start to craze and crack. Once it gets old, loses that flexibility.
All right, one more question about lenses, and that is multifocal or progressive lenses. So, who would they be a good option for, and how can we sort of make sure that they're set up correctly for driving?
Look, the number one demographic who might use a progressive lens is people in their 40s and 50s who are losing that focusing flexibility near. And what a multifocal allows you to do is have the top portion of the lens set at your distance prescription, down the bottom is reading, and sort of in between is a gradual increase till you get to the reading part. So theoretically, you should be able to find focus in any part of the lens. So the bottom for up close, the middle part for computer screens, and then further away. But they're all a bit of a compromise because we're trying to get them to do lots of different things. And so there's a little bit of swim and distortion in the peripheral part of the lens. And with the technology nowadays, to bring up the AI thing, there's a lot of that sort of stuff being used to be able to really custom design lenses for different individuals. But on a basic level, we look at outdoor active progressives, we look at more sort of all-round progressives, and then we look at more the office or indoor expert kind of a lens. And what that really comes down to is trying to find the compromise for you in that amount of distortion at the side. How wide is your visual field versus how narrow is the reading area? So an active or driving lens tends to have a very, very broad, wide distance field with very little distortion at the edge. So if you're needing to sort of look out to the side without turning your head, you're not looking through that distortion. But the minus is that it has a much narrower sort of reading area, which might be fine if you just need to be glancing at things when you're pulled up. If you're a delivery driver, for an example, where you're just checking off things, you're not having to do a lot of sort of, hours of reading, you're just checking something off, then that can be quite a useful lens. And then on the other end, if you're an IT user and you're trying to get a progressive lens to do everything, we go for an expert lens. It tends to creep up a little bit in that peripheral vision, not enough to be unsafe to drive, but it does it makes the reading area and the intermediate area for computer work much easier. But some people do find that peripheral distortion is something they need to get used to. And if you allow yourself, you'll start to make small compensatory head movements for those zones that might be a little less clear.
Yeah, and that's a really good segue to my next question, which is about peripheral vision. And like I've noticed myself, like now I wear glasses when I'm driving, and now I find that it's a lot less enjoyable, if that's the right word, for me driving, because I do have to move my head to a lot more compared to maybe when I wasn't wearing glasses and my peripheral vision was unobstructed. So is that a good argument maybe for people to think about contact lenses, because you are getting that unobstructed field of vision?
Absolutely. You've got a number of things that can interfere with your peripheral vision. So you've actually got the frame itself, depending on how it wraps, but even just the size. Different prescriptions impact on the change from your vision behind the lens to your vision outside the lens. And so for some people, their prescription, actually, they lose a little bit of visual field, a bit like a very mild version of losing your visual field when you look through binoculars. And that's an extreme example, but there is a slight little bit of field loss that you need to compensate for with the head movement. So some prescriptions are affected more than others. So, if you drive a lot, then, having a frame that's fairly big can certainly help maintain that peripheral vision. If you're sensitive to the distortion and progressive, then go for something that's a bit more all-round, or even a driving lens where that peripheral distortion is a little bit lower. And then the ultimate is contact lenses, because there is no boundaries. The other thing I like, I'm a contact lens wearer myself. The other thing I love about contact lenses is that the best part of the lens is always right in front of your eye, because the lens moves with your eye. You're always looking through the optic, the best optics of that lens can provide. So you've just got to watch the blinking and the dry eye, and making sure the fan's not on your face. So it brings up those sort of things you need to pay attention to.
All right. Well, let's talk about a special kind of contact lens, which is ortho K lenses, which are actually like lenses that you put in your eye at night. So throughout the day, you don't need any kind of eyewear assistance. So are there any sort of things that people should be aware of if they are ortho K users when it comes to
and look, and for a long time, so ortho K started as a device or an application that we used to help you to have good sight during the day without needing to use glasses, without needing to use contact lenses during the day. And it provides all the same benefits of laser surgery. So the only difference between that, I mean, obviously it's not surgical, but and you do have to maintain using this retainer lens every night to maintain that sort of effect. The big question mark was, well, if you've gone from being illegal to drive without correction, so if you are not wearing your glasses and your contact lenses and you don't meet the legal driving standards, then when you drive, you have to make sure that you've got the glasses on or contact lenses in, and you have to have, at least I'm in Queensland, we have to have an S on our license to say that we need a correction while we're driving. If you get ortho-K, then you meet the legal driving standards, but only by virtue of having worn the lens.
Right.
So it's a bit of a tricky sort of situation. What happens if you don't wear the lens? Then you're no longer legal. What should be on the license? And what it came down to from a policing point of view, from my experience, was my patients were asked, do you need the device while you're driving? Right? Do you need the lens to be on your eye while you're driving in order to have clear vision? The answer is no. And so it's taken some time, but the Australian Roads Authority has actually made a statement specifically around ortho-K. And it puts the onus on the driver to make sure that if they've not worn their lenses, that they have a backup prescription, either in glasses or soft daytime contact lenses, that restores them back to legal standards.
Right.
And so, I've actually said to patients, you need to go get your S removed off your license, because the police officer who pulls you over, basically it's a fairly binary decision for them. Do you need contact lenses in or glasses on or not? And then the rest becomes a honesty and sort of system of, puts the onus back on you to do the right thing.
And of course, with ortho-K, if you stop wearing them for a couple of nights, your eyes will sort of revert to their natural state.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone's a bit different. No, I have a couple of patients who could probably go 2 or 3 days, still be within the legal limits. I have others that after the very first night, they'll drop below the legal driving standards, because we're treating such a wide variety of prescriptions. Everyone's eye responds a little differently to ortho-K, so which is why it's such a custom-made kind of thing that we do. But yeah, everyone's a bit different. And if it's a question for somebody, like I have patients who just wear their won't drive if they've not worn their lenses. I have others who rarely ever miss a night, so it's just not something that comes up as a question for them. Although you would argue, look, if you're in an emergency, you need to know. So we will often do a trial of not wearing the lenses for a day or two and seeing where their vision lands, so that we've got a record of what their vision's like, and then, if necessary, a plan to have some basic pair of glasses or backup contact.
All right. Well, we've been talking about being on the road with 4 wheels. Let's talk about 2 wheels. So, as a former biker yourself, can you give us your perspective on what are some of the things that you need to consider regarding safety in general, I suppose, but also particularly eye safety when you're on the road and you're riding a motorcycle or even a bicycle, for that matter?
Yeah, look, and if you're a contact lens wearer, then obviously the wind factor. Shield up, obviously very difficult. Shield down, you still get a little bit of a breeze coming up under the helmet, and so some of the blinking stuff that we were talking about with car driving sort of applies there. The tricky part with helmets is if you do need to wear a prescription eyewear, is getting something that fits comfortably under the helmet. And a helmet needs to fit snugly, and with so many different brands and varieties out there, and a brand of helmet that's comfortable on one person's not going to be comfortable on the next. And people like me who are follicularly challenged, the comfort of a helmet can make a very, very big difference. And so what I encourage people to do, because the foam in the helmet might have joins in different places and they press, and everyone's head shape's a little different, is I encourage people to bring in their helmet so that we can kind of have a look at what sort of frame actually sort of works for them. Look, I haven't landed at a magic formula for, do you go one of those wraparound style frames? We stock Nike, and Nike is being a sort of a sports brand. Even their frames for prescription lenses tend to sort of just be a sort of a relatively simple wrap under design. So something like that, where you can sort of push it into the helmet and that wraps around, can be quite good. I've had other people who find they like the little bendy sides because it can kind of flex in its way in. I personally preferred the wrap with a fairly stiff arm so that you can just get it in there. The challenge is just finding something that's not going to sort of move up and down in the helmet it's going to sit sort of fairly sort of flush.
And if you're a person who prefers like an open face helmet, of course you've got to be careful for debris from the road and things, bugs, what have you. So it's really important to have some sort of impact resistant eyewear, isn't it? So
Yeah.
would you recommend like getting proper riding goggles, or do you think like sports sunglasses are probably good enough?
We need to understand, unless something's been sort of individually tested from a safety point of view, we can only talk about, look, most sunglasses are made out of impact resistant materials. And if you were getting a pair of prescription sunglasses made, then you would err on the side of getting, maybe polycarbonate material called Trivex out there, which are all more impact resistant. So they're the kind of plastics they make safety glasses out of them. Not if they haven't been tested and made to the right sort of standards, then they can't be classified as one. But that is a little bit more of an insurance policy compared to other materials or certainly glass. It's very hard to get nowadays anyway. But if you are, if you're used to wearing something like a goggle, then there are brands out there where you not only change the color of the lens, but you can also pop prescription inserts out. Something quite common in cycling for, the non-motorized cycling fraternity, where they have wraparound glasses with different blade lenses you can clip in, but a lot of those do come with a lens insert. We do that sometimes with safety glasses. So you have a safety glass that's already certified as a safety glass, and then we're able to pop prescription inserts in and out. The main one is finding something that works behind your helmet, and it's not going to be lifted up by the foam. It's going to be sort of fairly stable is the key part.
All right, excellent. Well, so a lot of great information there for motorists, bikers, and cyclists. Before we finish, any last thoughts, Paul?
No, not really. I think people just got to. I know there's a bit of pride in not having to wear glasses to drive, but ultimately, I think we need to think about safety first. These are, I think we sort of forget that they are dangerous objects that we're in command of. So, having not only your wits around you, but having your eyesight giving you as much information as possible is a good idea, and just kind of understanding that some of those little issues you might have around confidence, that driving in the wet, driving at night, might be down to a small prescription issue. And when we're suggesting that maybe you might benefit from a pair of glasses in that sort of situation, we're not sort of making you a spectacle prisoner for the rest of your life. And it's really just having the tools available to be able to enjoy driving as safely as possible.
Okay, so can you just remind people how to get in touch with you at Harmony Vision Care?
So harmonyvisioncare.com.au. If you're a local, then you can call us on 0755205900. You're able to contact us through the website. You can make appointments through the online appointment book system, and obviously there's emailing and contact forms and those sorts of things. So if you've got questions, then we're available. We're also on Facebook, doing YouTube, and Instagram.
Excellent. And if you want to be informed when Paul releases more helpful videos like this one, of course, please subscribe to his YouTube channel, and don't forget to hit the like button. And as Paul said, please follow his Facebook business page and Instagram as well. All right. Well, I guess thanks a lot, Paul. And so until next time, have a great day,
Thanks,
everyone.
Paul. Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Safe motoring. Bye-bye.
Keep the shiny side up.